Welcome to the College Checklist podcast by March Consulting College Planning and Higher Scores Test Prep, where we make the confusing chaos of the college admissions process a little more simple, particularly as we're entering into this new era of like testing and admissions, and everything seems to be changing every other month. We're bringing you a new guide to the application season with a whole new team of experts and guests. So, as always, I am your host and test prep expert, Julia. For this episode in particular, we're going in depth on college admissions specifically for homeschool families. And we've got two very special guests. They are both educational consultants who specialize in working with homeschool students, as well as co-authors of the book College Unmazed, your guide to design and document your homeschool journey. So, would you guys like to introduce yourselves?
Sure. Thank you so much for having us. My name is Michele Evard, and as Julia said, I'm an IEC who specializes in working with homeschool students, including gifted kids. I'm a lifelong learner and a parent of homeschoolers all along. Over 20 years, I've helped other families homeschool as well. And now doing this professionally, it has been a great opportunity and to write with Holly.
Aw, thanks, Michele. And Julia, thanks for having us on your show. Hi, everybody. I'm Holly Ramsey. I've home educated my own 5 children over 20 plus years and 3 different states. Additionally, I've taught hundreds of homeschoolers online when I was a Brave Writer writing instructor. And way back in the dark ages, started my career as a secondary school, public school teacher, and taught in a coalition of essential schools program within a public school district. So I've always been interested in alternative forms of education and where the reform is truly happening. And that's part of the reason I wound up with homeschooling.
Amazing. Thank you. This is probably something I haven't told you guys yet, but I was actually homeschooled in like elementary school for about 5 years. But my mom, who's a professional educator, has been for like obviously her whole life. But she was so intimidated by the like homeschooling in high school and the process of then getting into college from high school homeschooling that she was like, I need to put you guys back in school because I don't know what I'm doing. And so I feel like that's probably where you guys come in. So I'm curious, first of all, like how is sort of preparing for college admissions and applying to colleges, how is that different for homeschool students?
Yeah, so that's a great question. And I think that crisis of confidence that you're describing that your mom felt, I don't care how long someone's home educated. I think they do feel that, particularly when their oldest gets to 9th grade. It starts to feel really, really real, really official. So, in fact, that's part of the reason we wrote the book, because we want to walk alongside parents and show them this is doable. You can absolutely do this. So what's different for homeschooled students? In some senses, nothing. You are applying to the same colleges and universities as every other student. So in some ways, that is the same process for everyone. There are some wrinkles with homeschooled students. And first of all, I just want to say we're talking about homeschool students as if they are one thing. They are not. Homeschooling is not a monolith. Homeschooling means something different from state to state. There are various ways you can homeschool legally in one state that may not even be an option in another state. So the first thing I think families need to know is just, what's the regulation in your state? You need to be sure that you're clear on that. But homeschooling is not a monolith. And if a homeschooled student is in front of admissions committee, that admissions officer knows that homeschool. They don't know 40 homeschools. It's different for the individual. And I think, Michele, you probably have a lot more to say about that.
Well, the homeschools, The one thing everybody has in common is that the system didn't work for their child or their
Mm.
family at one point. It could be for 1 year, it could be for 12. We don't know, right? And the path that each family takes is different. Some people use a lot of packaged curriculum or a lot of self studies. It's different for everybody. And the parent is the counselor. So the parent creates the transcript, the course descriptions, all of the documentation, and that is different for everybody. So it does look different to college admissions officers. And like you said, it's stressful for parents. There's no one right way to homeschool. There's no one right way to document your homeschool, although we give you a lot of guidelines to how you can do it.
So I found it interesting that the title of your book was specifically how to part of it was how to document your homeschool journey. So is that specifically what you're talking about with like you're putting together the transcript and the description of the transcript that you submit to colleges yourself? So that's the documentation part that you're referring to?
It's part of the documentation, yes. When you
Mm.
think about an admissions officer for a school student, they read the school profile. They know what classes are available. Are there APs there or they're not? Is
Mm.
calculus at that school or not? All of those different things. Well, the parent gets to say, how did you study algebra? How did you study history? Yeah,
Mhm.
it's a suite.
So then when an admissions officer is looking at a homeschool student's application, or just perhaps in general, what are they looking for from like a strong application from a homeschool student?
Academic rigor is always key for strong students who are looking to apply to schools that have low admissions rates. So
Mm.
breadth and depth both are possible with homeschooling and for the same student. I know a student who loves math and is gifted in math and is already studying calculus in 8th or 9th grade can do college level math. So going deep, maybe their English isn't up to speed. So parent needs to make sure that they're prepared for college level English as well. And
Mm.
you can do unique studies. You can do package studies. After the pandemic lockdown time, everybody thought, oh, emergency remote learning was homeschooling, but it wasn't, right? That was an emergency for everybody. And
Mhm.
remote learning in an emergency environment is very different. So you don't have to, we see here sometimes people say, I need to homeschool my child. Maybe it's illness, maybe it's a situation in the school, whatever reason. I have to homeschool my child. So what online school do I sign up for? Those are two different
Ah.
things. They're two different things. You
Mhm.
don't have to. You can, but you don't have to. It is nice to do with that academic rigor to have some kind of outside validation for what you've done.
Mm. Yeah, I think as I've been working in test prep and seeing how it's changed recently, a lot of the test optional schools, particularly private schools, I will say, seem to have a separate clause, right? They sort of advertise like we're test optional, and then some of them will have a separate clause that's like we strongly recommend test scores for homeschool students. This is not a universal thing for all test optional schools. Some of them are like if you're homeschooled, you also don't have to submit test scores. Um, but many schools want some kind of, as you said, external validation, something else to sort of back up the transcript that you're submitting or whatever it may be, so that they have a point of proof in a way, even if it's not required, right? It if it can help make your application look stronger, um, then that is something that I personally would recommend, and I'd love to hear your personal experience with that. I think for many schools, it's not even necessarily that it needs to be an SAT or ACT. Some kind of AP test could work as well. It's more just about like what's going to make you look the best. And if you can or college level credits, I think is also something you mentioned. Something that's not just what you've done at home, so that they can have some confidence in your coursework.
Yeah, I think for sure, anyone with a good test score, like that's going to enhance an application. Do homeschoolers maybe get a little outsized bump from that because admission officers may be looking for a little bit more outside verification? Sure, maybe. But I would reinforce too that parents, as counselor, really do need to dig into these policies. So, for instance, I
Mhm.
was getting an
Yeah.
update just a week ago from a highly selective university that was exceptionally clear that if your score was below their median, it did not matter if you were homeschooled, first gen, they did not care. If your score was below the median, do not submit it. You should go test optional. I've seen
Mm.
other schools that were looked on the surface very test optional. But when I talked to the person who read Homeschoolers One-on-One, it was a situation where they said, no, what, we actually do prefer scores, even if maybe it's a tick
Mm.
below median. So I do think parents as counselor can ask these questions. I mean, of course, the student can always call the college and ask as well. But these questions that really are counselor side questions, parents can
Mm.
ask, and they should, because it is very difficult to parse the testing situation uh, at
Yeah.
schools today. But beyond that, as you mentioned, AP scores can, okay, sure, they can also be a way to validate. A dual enrolled course can, but really telling your story as a homeschool counselor in a way that makes sense and answers
Mm.
questions for the admission officer is another way to establish that rigor and convince people that what we did is awesome and legitimate and it worked well. So that begins on the
Mhm.
transcript. I mean, we think of homeschoolers as being, in their living room all day. And there are homeschoolers who don't do outside classes, but most do. More than half, we know from research, do classes either from an outside provider in the community or online, or one of these dual enrollments, either at part-time at the local public school or at the community college. So on your transcript, it should be clear at a glance who these providers
Mm.
are. So we always recommend to clients, put a provider column on your transcript. I want to be able to tell within 2 seconds, oh, okay, this person actually has 5 different ways they've shown
Mm.
that they are adaptable, because look, they were at the community college for this, but they were at a little co-op for this. So that's one way you can do it on the transcript. Most often, homeschoolers are going to back that transcript with course descriptions if a college will accept them. So we always encourage homeschool parents to, make sure you take that opportunity if it's afforded to you. Sure, maybe admission officers won't read the entire course description document, but they're going to dip into it. So have a concise, compelling course description that, again, just listing the books you chose for a course can in and of itself connote rigor.
Mhm.
If they see that, oh, well, shoot, I know they use that book in our first year history course, and this kid used that book in 10th grade, that means something to an admissions officer. And your homeschool
Mhm.
profile is another opportunity where you can, again, demonstrate that rigor, but also, Michelle always likes to say, it operates like a frequently asked questions document. If you couldn't take
Mhm.
AP because maybe you couldn't afford the AP class, or maybe there was no way you could get an AP exam seat, which is an issue in many states for homeschoolers,
Mhm.
don't assume admission officers know that. You have to explain that. Hey, we opted for dual enrollment for this reason, or vice versa. Admission officers don't really care what you do, they just want to know why you made the choices you did. And you can't assume that they know about your local context. So, explaining those choices and giving the readers that context is another way to add luster to the homeschool application.
And then there's the counselor
So,
recommendation.
oh yeah, sorry.
Yes, so they do actually read the counselor recommendation. They understand it's from a parent. Everybody knows that. That's okay. You're giving more context while the school profile answers some of the questions that they might have about what are the opportunities, what are the times when the kid was interacting with other people, not just sitting at the kitchen table as the stereotype would go, right? The counselor document, the counselor letter of recommendation answers questions that they might ask after reading the whole thing. Well, why did this student take that at this age? Why did they do public speaking as a freshman? Why did they, and those kinds of things, the context about the student as an individual can go in the counselor recommendation answering those kinds of questions.
So you want to tell a story about the sort of context or in which you are homeschooling, as well as the story of the particular student and what motivates them and why they made particular choices. Is that what I'm understanding correctly?
Yes.
Yeah.
We want to help them understand who the student is going to be in the future, right, on college campus and beyond.
That sounds like something that would be a lot to put together at the end of a student's college career. So, how can homeschool students and families start preparing early to sort of put together that story, that very clear picture for applications?
Well, that's why our book starts with design, because thinking in advance, it can be very, very helpful, and starting to keep track of why. You know, if you're going to have to talk about your school philosophy at the end, when you do the school profile, thinking about your why is so meaningful in advance. Why are you doing this? What do you gain? What opportunities do you have? And can you give your child through homeschooling? So starting with your goals, your philosophy, and it doesn't have to be super complicated, but do we want to help our child learn about lots of different perspectives? Do we want to help our child go deep into the things that they love? There's a lot of ways to describe this, right? Understanding your state requirements, as Holly said, that's key. Making sure that you homeschool in a legal fashion, really helpful. And if you're applying, your students applying to a state college in another state, they may have assumptions because they know what the regulations are in their state. And they may think you're going to homeschool like that, and you did it differently. And hey, I did it legally according to my state, and that's really important. But also, not the child, but the parent, say in 8th grade, understanding what college admissions offices are expecting to see. 4 years of English, 4 years of math, understanding what the core subjects are. You don't have to do them as distinct 4 subjects from September to June every year, but knowing one client told me, oh, it's like buckets. I've got to fill these buckets. That's right. You've got to show how the student learned these kinds of topics over time.
And I think I would just add to that, maybe I'm pushing back a little bit on this notion of intimidation. And like, I get it. We all know parents are nervous, but I might offer a reframing in that this is an opportunity. So, done well, the parent counselor documents for a homeschooled applicant offer a tremendous opportunity to slow down an admission officer. They're not looking at the 42nd kid applying to state flagship university from this one high school. They automatically have to slow down and consider your documents. This is an opportunity. And so my advice to parents, because I know they're freaking out when their kid is getting to 9th grade, like, don't forget to have fun. You do not have to set aside everything that was wonderful about your homeschooling K through 8 because suddenly now it's serious and you have to keep a transcript. So my advice as far as preparing early would be to be a student of your student and make sure that the things they love to do, you work in to your plan. That's the whole reason you're doing this. So sometimes I see parents who think they have to mimic the local public school or really conform to some cookie cutter sort of impression. And I know, Michelle and I have been fortunate enough that we've talked to a lot of admission officers, and one we love is Liam Daly out of Beloit College. And he has told us before that he gets a little sad, actually, when he reads a homeschooled applicant and it's like, just looks like everybody else. He said they get admitted. Like, don't get him wrong. Those kids get admitted. And you can be a perfectly average homeschool student and get admitted to a wide variety of places. But he likes it when he can see a particular interest or passion that is reflected in how they tailored this education to this child. So the real key benefit to homeschooling is that it is a humane form of education. So
Mm.
homeschoolers get to sleep. They get an hour more sleep per night than the average public school student. And part of the reason for that
Mhm.
is a bespoke education can be very efficient. You're not having to teach to a broad level, you're teaching to one student. So in preparing early, I would just add, I guess what I'm getting at is it is also a matter of attitude. And don't sweat some of the details. So most of the homeschool moms, it's typically moms who are doing this, some dads, but typically moms, they are very concerned about doing a good job. They take that obligation very seriously, and they tend to
Yeah.
be planners. So it's sometimes what I have to encourage is you can write ninth grade in pen. Go ahead, let's pen it in. But by the time if you're sitting with a ninth grader, your 12th grade plan is light pencil with a big eraser because a lot is going to
Yeah,
happen.
yeah.
And some
Yes.
decisions you will make in retrospect. Homeschoolers often don't know if something is a class or an activity. That is a very blurry line for homeschoolers
Mm.
sometimes. And I always encourage parents, like, you don't really have to decide until you make that transcript that's headed into college. Just keep good records. And we can decide later whether those music lessons should be grouped as a music credit or if that shines brightest on the activities list.
There,
Mm.
there are a lot of learning experiences that a homeschooler can have that might be self-directed, might be something they're doing for fun, and later you recognize it fills one of the buckets. You might recognize it in advance as a parent, you might recognize it in retrospect. When you think about orchestra, right? If you're at your local
Mm.
high school as a student and you take orchestra during the day, it's a school orchestra, it's on your transcript, we know where that goes. You go to the local community orchestra after school hours, that's not on your transcript, that's an activity. Well, if you're a homeschooler and you're in an orchestra, where does it go? Right? Some things are very clear cut like that. Sometimes it's really unique. Liam likes to talk about a student who did falconry, right? A student who did blacksmithing. Could it go on the transcript? Maybe. Maybe it belongs as an activity to show the uniqueness of what your child chose.
Mm.
One of the advantages of homeschooling, depending on how you do it and depending on your child, can be that they're making more and more of their own educational decisions over time, doing more of their own time management. They're not in the school from 8 to 3 with somebody telling them what to do today, right now, and tomorrow, right? So maybe they only take their co-op classes once a week, but they need to be prepared for next week's. It's a lot more like a college class. So there are things that sometimes people think, oh, how are we going to make sure they're prepared for college as a homeschooler? Sometimes you naturally have done that without
Yeah.
recognizing it. So it's that
Yeah.
moment of looking at what you've done and, oh, what does it take to be prepared for college? Oh, I've got that. Yeah.
Yeah. From personal experience, I will say it did, even though it was only like up through sixth grade, like it did put me very ahead of my peers in terms of being able to teach myself things and being able to have like study habits that like fit my needs. And so like by the time I got to college, I was like, I know what I'm doing. Obviously, it's a bit of a different ball game there with like you're walking all over the place and the I don't know, it's a little bit different, but for the most part, yeah, like I by the time we had finished homeschooling with my family, my mom would literally just like write the things for the day and we would just like do it all ourselves. We would teach ourselves from the book. We would just sit and read for like 4 hours. Like, and then I go back to regular classroom school and I'm like miles away ahead of my peers and like able to teach myself things. And so, yeah, I think if you are purposefully including that kind of self-actualization, maybe, I don't know if that's the right way to describe it, I think you are absolutely setting up for college. But from what I'm hearing from you guys, it's important to make sure that you have sort of a guiding principle and just document everything so that later on you can turn it into a picture that looks good, that tells a cohesive story.
Take photos, write on your calendar. Don't get
Yeah.
scared by the idea of documenting everything. It's not writing out a syllabus that says what I'm going to do every day for the next semester, or at the end of the semester, writing everything you did. Course descriptions, like Holly talked about, concise and compelling. We can have that, maybe one short paragraph. Algebra 1, we used this textbook. We covered all the chapters. I don't need a lot of description. Right.
Yeah. Algebra 1 is Algebra 1. And I would tack on a little bit here for test prep, if that is something that you decide is the right fit for you and your application. I would emphasize that you want to find test prep that is sort of teaching you the language and logic of the test, not just the content. You're probably covering a lot of the content in what you're already covering in your coursework. So what makes a test weird is that it has its own kind of internal little language and logic that's quite different from particularly what students in a classroom are getting. So as a homeschool student, you might be more adaptable in that sense, but you want to make sure that you are learning the particular language and logic of the specific test that you're taking, and then just getting tons and tons of repetition so that you get a sense of muscle memory for how you are specifically going to take the test, and knowing exactly the kind of language that you're looking for in the answer choices and stuff. Because they can get very long and very mentally draining. So yeah, you want to make sure you've got good instincts. Those are the two main things I tend to emphasize. Thank you both so much for having this conversation with me today. I'm so excited to get this information out to everyone who needs it. So where can our listeners find you guys and your work?
Well, our book is available through College Unmazed. So that's collegeunmazed.com/homeschool. And for all your listeners out there, you are welcome to use the promo code homeschool10. That will get you not only 10% off our book, but there's a fabulous homeschool deluxe bundle there, which gives you a lot of other information and books, a student prep book for getting ready for college, a dual enrollment book. So there's a bundle available, but the discount works on everything College Unmazed sells. So that's homeschool 10 with the digits 10. And you can find it at collegeunmazed.com/homeschool. And then we each have our own practice. So Michele, you want to tell yours and then I'll tell mine?
Sure. So that would be evardconsulting.com. I think it'll be in the show notes, but I can spell it.
Yes.
EV as in Victor, ARD consulting.com. And my email address is Michele@evardconsulting.com. It's Michele with one L, Michele.
And I am Holly Ramsey of Thoughtful Homeschooling. So you can find me at thoughtfulhomeschooling.com and can contact me at thoughtfulhomeschooling@gmail.com.
Amazing. And yes, that will all be linked on every platform in the show notes. We can make sure you can find that easily.
Perfect.
And if you'd like to contact me, you can send an email to hello@higherscorestestprep.com and check out higherscorestestprep.com, the website, to learn more about our courses, free resources. We've got specifically a parent guide to the SAT and ACT. And that is all for now. Thank you so much for listening, and best of luck with your applications.
Thank you.
Thanks so much. And I never held up our book, but there it is.